She sat there in my antique velvet armchair, sipping the expensive Earl Grey tea I'd served in my grandmother's finest bone china. Her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around the delicate handle as she smiled that insufferably smug smile that had been haunting my dreams for weeks. Sophia Blackwell thought she was so clever, sitting in my own living room, complimenting my interior design choices while secretly planning to steal my entire life, having absolutely no idea that in exactly 27 minutes, my billionaire brother would walk through that mahogany front door with information that would obliterate her perfectly constructed facade, and turn that condescending smirk into the kind of terror that would make her wish she'd never heard the name Madison Sinclair. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. What Sophia didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have anticipated despite all her careful scheming and manipulation, was that while she'd been busy seducing my husband and convincing herself that she was about to upgrade from mistress to wife, I'd been quietly setting up the most devastating trap that Willowbrook Heights had ever witnessed. The woman who thought she could waltz into my marriage, charm my husband away from me, and then have the audacity to sit in my home making small talk about my decorating skills, was about to discover that some games are infinitely more dangerous than the players realize, especially when you're playing against someone whose family built half of Connecticut's most exclusive communities and whose older brother had enough wealth and influence to destroy entire companies before breakfast. Watched her carefully as she set down the teacup with practiced elegance, her emerald eyes scanning my drawing room with the calculating gaze of someone who was already mentally redecorating, already imagining herself as the mistress of this Georgian colonial mansion that had been in my family for 3 generations. She was beautiful, I had to give her that much credit, the kind of polished, sophisticated beauty that came from expensive personal trainers, high-end salons, and a wardrobe that probably cost more than most people's cars. Her honey blonde hair fell in perfect waves past her shoulders, styled with the effortless perfection that actually required hours of professional attention, and her designer dress, a midnight blue creation that I recognized as Tom Ford's latest collection, hugged her figure in all the right places while maintaining an air of tasteful respectability. But beneath all that carefully constructed perfection, I could see the predator lurking just below the surface. Sophia Blackwell wasn't just another woman having an affair with a married man. She was a strategic operator who had systematically identified my husband as her ticket to the kind of lifestyle she felt she deserved. She'd done her research. I had to admit that. Marcus Sinclair wasn't just any cheating husband. He was the successful architect who'd designed some of the most prestigious buildings in the tri-state area. The man whose family owned significant real estate holdings throughout New England. The kind of catch that could provide not just love but financial security and social status for decades to come. What she hadn't researched quite thoroughly enough was the rest of the Sinclair family tree, particularly the branch that included my older brother Alexander, whose net worth made my husband's considerable success look like pocket change. Alexander Sinclair hadn't just inherited wealth, he'd multiplied it exponentially through a series of brilliant investments and strategic business acquisitions that had made him one of the youngest billionaires on the East Coast. More importantly for my current situation, Alexander was fiercely protective of family and had absolutely no tolerance for people who tried to manipulate or betray the people he loved. The irony of this moment wasn't lost on me as I sat across from my husband's mistress, making polite conversation about the unseasonably warm October weather, while internally counting down the minutes until her world would explode in spectacular fashion. For the past 2 months, I'd been playing the role of the oblivious wife, the woman who was supposedly too busy with her charity work and social obligations to notice that her husband was spending 3 evenings a week at business dinners that never seemed to involve any actual business associates. I'd pretended not to see the expensive gifts that appeared in his wardrobe. The new cologne that was definitely not the brand he'd worn for our entire 8-year marriage. The way his phone had suddenly become password protected after years of casual sharing. But while Sophia and Marcus thought they were conducting their affair with sophisticated discretion, they had no idea that I'd been documenting every rendezvous, every lie, every stolen moment with the kind of methodical precision that would have impressed a federal prosecutor. The private investigator I'd hired, a former FBI agent named Catherine Mills who specialized in high-profile matrimonial cases, had provided me with enough evidence to destroy both their reputations and their careers in multiple devastating ways. Hotel receipts from their weekend getaways to exclusive resorts in Martha's Vineyard and the Hamptons, restaurant bills from intimate dinners at establishments where Marcus had supposedly been meeting with potential clients, and most damning of all, photographs that captured their relationship in ways that left absolutely no room for alternative explanations. The timing of today's visit was particularly delicious in its irony. Sophia had called yesterday, her voice dripping with false concern, to suggest that we should get to know each other better since she and Marcus worked so closely together on various architectural projects. She'd proposed afternoon tea at my home, claiming that she'd heard so much about my beautiful house and my reputation as a gracious hostess that she simply had to experience both firsthand. What she was really doing, of course, was conducting reconnaissance, getting a closer look at the life she intended to claim as her own, while simultaneously twisting the knife by pretending to befriend the woman she was betraying. The audacity was breathtaking, really. Here was a woman who had been systematically dismantling my marriage for months, who had convinced my husband to start planning a future that didn't include me, who had been whispering poison in his ear about how much happier he could be with someone who truly understood his ambitions and desires. And she had the unmitigated gall to sit in my living room complimenting my taste in antique furniture, while secretly calculating how she would rearrange everything once she took my place. But as I watched her performance, noting the way her eyes lingered a bit too long on the family photographs displayed on my mantelpiece, the way she asked just a few too many questions about my daily routines and social commitments, I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Because unlike every other woman who had ever been in my position, unlike every other betrayed wife who had discovered her husband's affair and found herself powerless to do anything about it except file for divorce and hope for a reasonable settlement, I had resources that most people could only dream of. In less than half an hour, Alexander would arrive with information that would not only expose Sophia's affair with my husband, but also reveal aspects of her past that would make her current deception look like a minor indiscretion. My brother hadn't just been investigating her relationship with Marcus. He'd been conducting a comprehensive background check that had turned up financial irregularities, professional misconduct, and personal betrayals that painted a picture of a woman who made a career out of using and discarding people who trusted her. The woman sitting across from me, sipping tea and making small talk about the upcoming charity gala season, had no idea that she was about to become the cautionary tale that people in our social circle would whisper about for years to come. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. All right, let's get back to it. Before we dive deeper into this story of betrayal, family loyalty, and the most satisfying revenge that Willowbrook Heights has ever witnessed, I want to connect with all of you watching from around the world. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're tuning in from tonight, whether you're watching from New York, London, Tokyo, or anywhere in between. I love knowing that we're building this incredible community of people who believe that justice should be served when someone thinks they can manipulate and betray the people who trust them most. And if you've ever found yourself face to face with someone who smiled to your face while stabbing you in the back, if you've ever dealt with a person who thought they were so clever and sophisticated that they could get away with elaborate deceptions, then you absolutely need to hit that subscribe button right now. Because tomorrow I'm bringing you another story that will blow your mind. It's about a business partner who thought she could embezzle from a family company for 2 years without getting caught, until she discovered that some families have resources that make corporate fraud investigators look like amateur detectives. But tonight's story hits different because it's not just about catching a cheater or exposing a liar. This is about the moment when someone who thought they could systematically destroy a marriage discovered that they'd picked the wrong family to mess with. This is about what happens when a woman who specializes in seducing married men for financial gain suddenly finds herself going up against people who have the kind of wealth and influence that can make problems disappear permanently. I know some of you are thinking, well, why didn't she just confront her husband directly? Why go through all this elaborate planning? And trust me, I get that question a lot. But here's the thing. When someone has been lying to you for months, when they've constructed an entire alternate reality based on deception and manipulation, a simple confrontation isn't enough. They'll just lie more. They'll gaslight you. They'll make you question your own sanity and your own worth. What happened in my drawing room that October afternoon wasn't just about exposing an affair. It was about ensuring that a predator who made a career out of destroying marriages and manipulating vulnerable people faced consequences that were so complete, so devastating, that she would never again be able to victimize another family. Some of you might also be wondering how I managed to stay so calm while my husband's mistress sat in my living room, drinking my tea and complimenting my home while secretly planning to take my place. The answer is simple. When you know that justice is coming, when you've spent weeks preparing the perfect trap, when you have a brother whose resources can make billionaires nervous, you don't need to lose your composure. You can afford to be patient because you know that victory is guaranteed. And for those of you who are going through something similar right now, who are dealing with betrayal or manipulation or people who think they're too clever to face consequences, I want you to know that this story isn't just entertainment. It's proof that sometimes, if you're strategic enough and you have the right resources, you can ensure that people who hurt others face exactly the kind of accountability they deserve. The community we're building here isn't just about watching other people get their comeuppance, though I'll admit that's satisfying as hell. We're building a space where people who've been underestimated, who've been betrayed, who've been told they should just move on and forget, can see that sometimes justice really is possible. Sometimes the people who think they're untouchable learn that they picked the wrong person to mess with. So make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on, because the stories I'm sharing aren't just random tales of revenge. They're carefully chosen examples of what happens when manipulators and predators discover that their victims have resources they never anticipated. Tomorrow's story involves a woman who thought she could steal from a family business because the owners seemed too trusting and naive to notice. She had no idea that the family's naive approach to business was actually a carefully constructed test, and that they'd been setting up people like her for years. But tonight, we're focusing on Sophia Blackwell, the woman who thought she could waltz into my marriage, seduce my husband, and then have the audacity to sit in my home making small talk while planning to destroy my life. What she didn't know was that in exactly 24 minutes now, my brother Alexander would walk through that door with information that would reveal her affair as just the tip of the iceberg. Because here's what Sophia hadn't researched carefully. Enough. The Sinclair family doesn't just have money. We have the kind of generational wealth that comes with connections, influence, and the ability to uncover secrets that people thought were buried forever. Alexander hadn't just been investigating her relationship with my husband. He'd been conducting the kind of comprehensive background investigation that would make federal prosecutors envious. And what he'd discovered about Sophia's past was so much worse than a simple affair that even I was shocked when he first briefed me on his findings. This woman hadn't just targeted my husband. She'd been systematically targeting wealthy married men for years, using the same playbook over and over again until she'd perfected the art of breaking up marriages for profit. But this time, she'd chosen the wrong family. This time, she was about to learn that some people have resources that make her little games look like child's play. The woman who thought she was so sophisticated, so clever, so irresistibly charming, was about to discover what happens when you try to manipulate people who have enough money to buy and sell most countries' GDP. So buckle up, because what happened next in my drawing room that afternoon changed not just my life, but the entire social landscape of Willowbrook Heights. And it all started when my brother Alexander walked through that mahogany door with a folder full of information that would destroy Sophia Blackwell so completely that she would spend the rest of her life wishing she'd never heard the name Sinclair. My name is Madison Sinclair, and at 31 years old, I've learned that sometimes the most devastating battles aren't fought with weapons or harsh words, but with strategic patience and the kind of resources that most people can only dream of accessing. What makes my story different from every other tale of marital betrayal you've ever heard isn't just the scale of the deception I uncovered, or even the spectacular way it all came crashing down that October afternoon. What makes this story unique is that I had something most betrayed wives don't have: a family whose wealth and influence could move mountains, and an older brother who would literally burn the world down before letting anyone hurt the people he loves. The Sinclair name carries weight in Connecticut that goes back 4 generations. My great-grandfather, Thomas Sinclair, arrived from Scotland in 1892 with nothing but ambition and an uncanny ability to predict which pieces of land would become valuable as the railroad expanded. By 1920, he owned half of what would eventually become Willowbrook Heights, and his son, my grandfather Robert, turned that land into one of the most exclusive residential communities on the East Coast. My father, William Sinclair, expanded the family interests into commercial development, creating the shopping centers and office complexes that generated steady income for decades. But it was my brother Alexander who truly transformed the Sinclair legacy from old money into generational wealth. At 35, Alexander isn't just rich. He's wealthy in the way that allows him to influence elections, fund medical research, and make phone calls that can change the course of entire industries. His venture capital firm, Sinclair Holdings, has invested in everything from biotech startups to renewable energy companies, and his portfolio includes stakes in companies whose names you'd recognize from your daily life. When Forbes estimated his net worth at $2.8 billion last year, Alexander's response was to joke that they'd obviously missed a few overseas accounts. Growing up as Alexander Sinclair's little sister meant learning very early that money isn't just about buying expensive things. It's about having options that other people don't have. When I was 16 and got accepted to both Harvard and Princeton, Alexander hired private tutors to help me prepare for whichever choice I made. When I decided to major in art history instead of business, something that horrified our father, Alexander simply smiled and said that life was too short to spend it doing anything that didn't make you genuinely happy. After graduating summa cum laude from Harvard, I could have worked anywhere, done anything. Alexander offered me a position at Sinclair Holdings that would have made me a multimillionaire by 30. Instead, I chose to follow my passion for art and culture, becoming the youngest curator ever hired by the Whitmore Museum of Fine Arts in Hartford. My specialty was Renaissance paintings, and I spent my 20s traveling through Europe, authenticating works for private collectors and developing relationships with the kind of exclusive art dealers who could acquire pieces that weren't technically supposed to be for sale. The work wasn't just intellectually fulfilling, it was perfect training for recognizing when things weren't what they appeared to be. Authenticating Renaissance paintings requires an almost supernatural ability to spot inconsistencies that others miss. A brush stroke that's slightly wrong, a pigment that wasn't available in the supposed time period, a signature that's been carefully forged by someone who understood the technical aspects, but missed the subtle psychological elements that made each master's work unique. I learned to trust my instincts when something felt off, even when I couldn't immediately articulate what was wrong. These skills served me well in my professional life, but they also made me confident in my personal relationships in ways that probably made me more vulnerable than I should have been. When I met Marcus at a gallery opening 6 years ago, I was immediately drawn to his passion for architecture and his genuine appreciation for art. He wasn't trying to impress me with his success or his family connections. He simply loved beautiful things and could talk for hours about the relationship between form and function in both buildings and paintings. Marcus came from a successful family, but not Sinclair-level successful. his father owned a respected architectural firm, and Marcus had built on that foundation to create his own practice specializing in luxury residential design. He was handsome in an understated way, with dark hair that was always slightly mussed from running his hands through it while he worked, and green eyes that lit up when he talked about a particularly challenging design problem. More importantly, he seemed genuinely uninterested in my family's wealth, which was refreshing after years of dating men who were more excited about my last name than they were about getting to know me. Our courtship was everything I'd hoped for in a relationship. Marcus would pick me up after work, and we'd drive through neighborhoods he was designing homes for, with him explaining his vision for how the architecture would complement the natural landscape. I'd take him to private gallery showings where we'd debate the artistic merits of contemporary pieces versus classical works. We traveled together to Italy, where I was researching a potentially misattributed Caravaggio, and Marcus spent his free time sketching architectural details from Renaissance buildings that inspired his own work. The proposal came during a weekend, at our family's estate in Martha's Vineyard, where Marcus had designed and overseen the construction of a new guest house that incorporated design elements from both Scottish castles and Italian villas. He proposed at sunset on the terrace of the guest house he'd created, telling me that he wanted to spend his life building beautiful spaces with the woman who'd taught him to see beauty in ways he'd never imagined. Our wedding was everything I'd dreamed of, an intimate ceremony for 150 guests at the family estate, with Marcus's architectural vision transforming the grounds into something that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale. Alexander gave a toast that had everyone in tears, talking about how he'd watched me grow from a stubborn little girl who insisted on rearranging her dollhouse furniture every week into a woman who could see beauty and authenticity in everything around her, and how proud he was that I'd found someone who appreciated those qualities. For the first 6 years of our marriage, everything was exactly as perfect as it had appeared on our wedding day. Marcus's career flourished, with his residential designs winning awards and attracting clients who were willing to pay premium prices for his unique aesthetic vision. I continued advancing at the museum, eventually becoming the senior curator for European paintings and developing a reputation as one of the most knowledgeable authenticators on the East Coast. We bought the Georgian colonial mansion in Willowbrook Heights that had been built in 1847 by one of my great-grandfather's business partners, and Marcus spent 2 years renovating it with the kind of attention to historical detail that preservation societies used as examples of how restoration should be done. The house became our masterpiece, a perfect blend of historical authenticity and contemporary comfort that served as both our home and a showcase for Marcus's architectural vision. But what I didn't understand until much later was that my confidence in my ability to spot deception, combined with my complete trust in Marcus, had created a blind spot that someone with the right skills could exploit. I was so good at detecting lies in my professional life that I assumed I would automatically notice them in my personal life. I was so secure in our relationship that it never occurred to me to apply the same analytical scrutiny to my husband's behavior that I applied to potentially forged paintings. The woman who could spot a fake Rembrandt from across a crowded auction house somehow missed the signs that her own husband was constructing an elaborate deception that made art forgery look simple by comparison. And Sophia Blackwell, sitting across from me in that antique velvet armchair, had no idea that she was about to discover what happened when someone tried to deceive a family whose resources included not just money, but the kind of investigative capabilities that could uncover secrets buried deeper than most people thought possible. Until 8 months ago, I genuinely believed that Marcus and I had achieved something that most couples only dream of: a marriage that balanced individual success with genuine partnership, financial security with emotional fulfillment, and social recognition with private happiness. Our life in Willowbrook Heights wasn't just comfortable. It was the kind of existence that made other couples look at us with a mixture of admiration and envy, wondering what our secret was and whether they could somehow replicate the magic we seemed to have created together. Our morning routines had evolved into a perfectly choreographed dance of domestic harmony. Marcus would wake up first, usually around 6:30, and head to his home office to review blueprints and client emails while drinking the French press coffee he'd learned to make during our honeymoon in Paris. I'd join him an hour later with fresh croissants from the French bakery in downtown Willowbrook Heights, and we'd spend 30 minutes discussing our respective schedules for the day, sharing insights about our current projects, and planning our evening activities with the casual efficiency of two people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. The house itself had become a testament to our combined vision and Marcus's architectural genius. Every room told a story of careful restoration and thoughtful modernization, from the original 1847 crown molding that Marcus had painstakingly restored to match the historical specifications, to the state-of-the-art kitchen that seamlessly blended contemporary functionality with period-appropriate aesthetics. The master bedroom featured hand-painted wallpaper that I'd discovered in a Parisian antique shop, while Marcus had designed custom built-in bookcases that displayed my collection of art history volumes alongside his architectural references. Our social calendar was the envy of everyone in our circle, filled with events that showcased both our professional achievements and our personal happiness. Monthly dinner parties in our restored dining room brought together museum board members, prominent architects, successful entrepreneurs, and cultural influencers who consistently commented on the warmth and sophistication of our home. Marcus had a gift for making everyone feel welcome, whether they were discussing multi-million-dollar construction projects or debating the artistic merits of contemporary sculpture installations. The annual charity gala that we hosted each spring for the Whitmore Museum had become one of the most anticipated social events in Connecticut, raising more money each year while cementing our reputation as the couple who could effortlessly blend philanthropy with entertainment. Last year's gala raised over $2 million for the museum's acquisition fund, partly because Marcus had designed a stunning temporary pavilion in our garden that served as the perfect backdrop for the evening's festivities. Professionally, we were both at the peak of our respective careers. Marcus's architectural firm had expanded to include 12 associates, and his residential designs were being featured in Architectural Digest and Town & Country with increasing frequency. His latest project, a waterfront estate in Newport, had been commissioned by a tech billionaire who specifically sought out Marcus after seeing his work featured in a documentary about contemporary American architecture. My own career was flourishing in ways that exceeded my most optimistic expectations. The Renaissance authentication work had led to consulting opportunities with major auction houses, private collectors, and even government agencies investigating art theft and forgery. My expertise had been featured in Art in America and ART News, and I'd been invited to speak at international conferences about the intersection of technology and traditional authentication methods. The Whitmore Museum had created a new position specifically for me, Director of Authentication and Acquisitions, that came with a substantial salary increase and the budget to pursue major works that would enhance the museum's reputation globally. Our financial situation was enviable even by Willowbrook Heights standards. Marcus's firm was generating 7 figures annually, while my museum salary and consulting fees provided additional stability. Combined with the trust fund that Alexander had established for me on my 25th birthday, we had the kind of financial security that allowed us to make decisions based on passion rather than necessity. We could afford to travel to art fairs in Basel and architectural exhibitions in Venice, to purchase original works for our personal collection, and to invest in the kind of experiences that enriched our understanding of our respective fields. The travel experiences we shared were particularly meaningful, combining business with pleasure in ways that deepened both our professional knowledge and our personal connection. Our trip to Florence 2 years ago exemplified this perfect balance. I spent mornings in the Uffizi researching provenance records for potentially misattributed works, while Marcus explored Renaissance architectural techniques that influenced his contemporary designs. Our evenings were spent in intimate restaurants overlooking the Arno, discussing how historical artistic movements had shaped modern aesthetic sensibilities. Our social relationships were equally fulfilling, with friendships that spanned both our professional and personal interests. Couples like David and Patricia Langford, who owned one of Hartford's most successful law firms, regularly joined us for weekend trips to cultural events in New York City. The Ashworth family, whose pharmaceutical company had commissioned Marcus to design their new headquarters, became close friends who shared our passion for supporting local arts organizations. Even our extended family relationships were sources of joy rather than stress. Alexander had embraced Marcus immediately, appreciating his integrity and his genuine disinterest in the Sinclair family wealth. Their friendship had developed organically through shared interests in innovative business strategies and classical architecture, with Alexander often seeking Marcus's input on design elements for his various construction projects. Family gatherings at the Martha's Vineyard estate were relaxed affairs where Marcus fit seamlessly into conversations ranging from venture capital trends to historical preservation techniques. Our intimate moments were equally satisfying, with a physical and emotional connection that had deepened rather than diminished over our years together. Marcus had a way of making me feel simultaneously cherished and desired, whether we were hosting formal dinner parties or enjoying quiet Sunday mornings reading in bed. He remembered details about my work that even I sometimes forgot, asking thoughtful questions about authentication challenges and celebrating my professional victories with genuine enthusiasm. The respect we commanded in our community was evident in the invitations we received and the positions we were offered. Marcus served on the Willowbrook Heights Planning Commission, where his expertise influenced decisions about architectural standards and historical preservation. I had been elected to the board of the Connecticut Arts Council, a position that allowed me to shape funding decisions for cultural organizations throughout the state. Our home had been featured in Connecticut magazine as an example of successful historical restoration, with a 12-page spread that showcased Marcus's architectural vision and my curatorial eye for decorative arts. The article described our marriage as a partnership that exemplifies how two successful professionals can create something beautiful together without sacrificing their individual ambitions. Looking back now, I realize that the very perfection of our life should have made me more suspicious when things began to change. When you've built something that seems unshakable, when your relationship appears to be the gold standard that others aspire to achieve, it becomes almost impossible to imagine that the foundation could be crumbling beneath your feet. The woman who could spot a forged signature on a Renaissance painting somehow missed the signs that her own perfect marriage was becoming an elaborate performance designed to conceal a betrayal that would make art forgery look honest by comparison. But 8 months ago, sitting in my perfectly restored drawing room with my husband's mistress drinking tea from my grandmother's china, I still believed that Marcus and I had achieved something rare and precious. I had no idea that the woman smiling at me across the antique coffee table was about to learn what happened when someone tried to destroy something that belonged to the Sinclair family. The changes began so subtly that I convinced myself they were natural adjustments to our evolving careers, the kind of minor shifts that happen in any successful marriage when both partners are experiencing professional growth and new opportunities. Marcus had always been dedicated to his work, but suddenly that dedication seemed to require longer hours, more client meetings, and an increasing number of weekend consultations that took him away from our carefully maintained routines. The first deviation I noticed was his morning coffee ritual. For 5 years, Marcus had made French press coffee for both of us every single morning, timing it perfectly so that my cup would be ready when I joined him in his office at 7:30. But around March, he started leaving the house earlier, claiming that he needed to meet potential clients for breakfast meetings before they headed to their offices. These breakfast meetings always seemed to be with people I'd never heard of, despite my extensive knowledge of Marcus's professional network and client base. When I asked about these new clients, Marcus would provide details that sounded plausible, but were strangely vague. a pharmaceutical executive who was considering building a custom home in Westport but wanted to keep the project confidential until his company's merger was complete. A tech entrepreneur who was relocating from California and needed to understand East Coast architectural styles before committing to a design. A hedge fund manager's wife who was interested in historically accurate restoration work but insisted on meeting at odd hours due to her complicated social schedule. The weekend patterns changed next, and this shift was more noticeable because our Saturdays and Sundays had been sacred throughout our marriage. We'd established traditions around weekend antiquing trips, visits to art galleries and architectural sites, and long Sunday brunches where we'd read the newspapers together and discuss our upcoming week. These rituals had been non-negotiable, the foundation of our personal time together that balanced our demanding professional lives. But suddenly, Marcus was receiving urgent calls from clients who needed immediate consultations, site visits that couldn't wait until Monday, design emergencies that required his personal attention on Saturday afternoons or Sunday mornings. The excuses were always reasonable when viewed individually, but the frequency was unprecedented in our marriage. In 6 months, we went from spending entire weekends together to having maybe 3 uninterrupted Sundays where Marcus wasn't called away for some professional crisis. The evening routines that had anchored our daily connection began disintegrating in ways that felt gradual but ultimately proved devastating. Marcus started staying at the office later, claiming that he needed uninterrupted time to work on complex design problems after his staff had gone home. He'd call around 6:30 to say he'd grab dinner at the deli near his office and work until 9 or 10, arriving home too exhausted for meaningful conversation. These late evenings became so frequent that I found myself eating dinner alone, 3 or 4 nights a week, something that had never happened in our marriage except when one of us was traveling for business. When Marcus did arrive home, he seemed distracted and tired in ways that made our usual intimate conversations feel forced and superficial. The man who had always been eager to hear about my authentication work and discuss the artistic or historical significance of my latest discoveries suddenly seemed to have limited attention for topics that didn't directly relate to his own projects. The by phone behavior was perhaps the most jarring change, though I initially dismissed it as a response to increased client demands. Marcus had always been casual about his phone, leaving it on kitchen counters or bedroom nightstands, answering calls in my presence, and occasionally asking me to check messages when he was driving or busy with other tasks. We'd shared the comfortable, digital intimacy of a couple who had no secrets from each other. But starting in April, Marcus's phone became a constant presence that he guarded carefully. He began taking it with him to the bathroom, something he'd never done in our years together. During dinner conversations, I noticed him glancing at the screen when he thought I wasn't looking, his expression shifting in ways that suggested the messages he was receiving required more attention than typical client communications. When I commented on his increased phone usage, Marcus explained that his expanding client base required more immediate responsiveness, that wealthy clients expected their architect to be available for questions and concerns outside normal business hours. He'd purchased a second phone specifically, for business use, he said, to ensure that personal calls wouldn't interfere with client communications. This explanation sounded reasonable, but I noticed that he never seemed to carry 2 phones, and the device he protected so carefully looked identical to his personal phone that I'd seen hundreds of times before. The physical changes were subtle, but unmistakable to someone who'd been intimate with the same person for 6 years. Marcus began showering immediately when he arrived home from work, claiming that construction sites and client meetings left him feeling dusty and unprofessional. This was a significant departure from his usual routine of changing into comfortable clothes and relaxing with a glass of wine before eventually showering later in the evening. His grooming habits shifted in ways that seemed individually insignificant, but created a pattern when viewed together. Marcus started getting his hair cut every 3 weeks instead of every 6 weeks, often scheduling appointments during lunch breaks rather than our usual Saturday morning routine at the barbershop we'd frequented together for years. He replaced his longtime cologne with something more expensive and sophisticated, claiming that his increased interaction with high-end clients required attention to details like fragrance that conveyed success and professionalism. The wardrobe upgrades were more obvious and harder to explain away. Marcus had always dressed well, but his professional attire had been consistent and practical, quality suits that projected competence without unnecessary flash. Suddenly, he was purchasing designer ties, upgrading his watches, and buying shirts from exclusive haberdashers that catered to Connecticut's wealthiest professionals. When I complimented his improved appearance, Marcus explained that his client base was becoming more sophisticated and image-conscious, requiring him to project the same level of refinement they expected in their architectural designs. The travel schedule intensified in ways that disrupted plans we'd made months in advance. Marcus began mentioning architectural conferences and professional development opportunities that seemed to conflict with events we'd already committed to attending together. A sustainable building symposium in Portland that coincided with our planned anniversary weekend in Nantucket. A historical preservation workshop in Charleston that prevented him from accompanying me to an important art authentication conference in Washington, D.C. These conflicts required us to cancel or modify plans that had been important to both of us, and Marcus seemed genuinely regretful about the timing issues. He'd show me conference websites and professional development materials that explained why these opportunities were crucial for his career advancement, and his disappointment about missing our shared activities appeared completely sincere. Financial patterns were perhaps the most subtle changes, requiring my curatorial attention to detail to notice inconsistencies that might have escaped someone less trained in spotting anomalies. Our joint credit card statements began showing charges that didn't align with Marcus's explained activities. Expensive restaurants in Hartford, during times when he claimed to be working late at the office, gas purchases in towns where he supposedly had client meetings but no major construction projects. When I asked about these expenses during our monthly financial reviews, Marcus provided explanations that were detailed enough to sound credible, but vague enough to avoid easy verification. Business dinners with potential clients who preferred to meet outside Willowbrook Heights for privacy reasons. Site visits to properties that were still in preliminary planning stages, requiring confidentiality agreements that prevented him from sharing specific details. The emotional distance was the most devastating change, though also the hardest to quantify or address directly. Marcus was still affectionate and attentive, still the charming husband who made me feel cherished and desired, but something fundamental had shifted in the quality of his attention. Our conversations felt slightly performative, as if he was going through the motions of being interested in my work and my thoughts, rather than genuinely engaging with topics that had always fascinated him. Looking back now, I realized that Marcus was implementing a carefully constructed strategy for maintaining his marriage while pursuing something else that required significant time, energy, and emotional investment. Every change in his behavior served a dual purpose: creating space for activities I wasn't supposed to know about while providing plausible explanations that would satisfy my questions without triggering deeper investigation. But what Marcus didn't fully understand was that he was changing these patterns in the presence of someone whose professional expertise involved detecting when things weren't what they appeared to be. The same analytical skills that helped me identify forged brushstrokes in Renaissance paintings were beginning to register inconsistencies in my husband's behavior that didn't align with his explanations, even though I wasn't yet ready to acknowledge what those inconsistencies might mean. The moment that shattered every illusion I'd maintained about my marriage occurred on a rainy Thursday afternoon in September, during what should have been a routine task that I'd performed countless times throughout our 6 years together. Marcus was supposedly attending a 3-day architectural innovation summit in Boston, an event he'd described in detail over dinner the previous week, complete with speaker names, workshop topics, and his excitement about networking opportunities with sustainable design specialists from across New England. I was in our master bedroom, preparing to reorganize Marcus's closet as a surprise for his return, something I did periodically to ensure his extensive wardrobe remained properly organized, and that seasonal items were stored appropriately. This wasn't unusual. I'd always taken pride in maintaining our home's organization, and Marcus genuinely appreciated my attention to details that kept his professional appearance impeccable without requiring his direct involvement. As I began, sorting through his suits, checking pockets for business cards, receipts, or other items that needed to be filed or discarded, my fingers encountered something in the inner breast pocket of his charcoal gray Armani suit, the one he'd worn to the museum's board meeting 2 weeks earlier. It was a small envelope, expensive cream-colored paper with the weight and texture that suggested custom stationery rather than commercial correspondence. The envelope wasn't sealed, and what I discovered inside made my hands begin trembling before my mind could fully process the implications. It was a handwritten note on matching stationery, written in elegant feminine script that spoke of expensive private school education and careful attention to penmanship. But it wasn't the handwriting that made my world tilt sideways. It was the content that revealed a level of intimacy and emotional connection that should have belonged exclusively to our marriage. "My darling Marcus," the note began, and those 3 words were enough to make my legs weak. "Last weekend at the Ocean View Resort was absolutely magical. Every moment we spent together reminds me why I fell so completely in love with you and why I can't wait for the day when we don't have to hide anymore. The way you held me while we watched the sunrise from our suite's balcony, the champagne dinner you arranged with the violinist playing our song, the promises you made about our future together. All of it was more perfect than anything I'd ever imagined." The note continued with details that made it impossible to dismiss as anything other than evidence of a full-fledged romantic relationship. References to our favorite restaurant in Mystic, where they'd apparently become regulars, mentions of weekend getaways to luxury resorts that coincided exactly with Marcus's claimed business trips, and most devastating of all, discussion of future plans that clearly didn't include me. "I know the next few months will be challenging while you handle the situation with Madison," the note continued, and seeing my own name written in another woman's handwriting by someone discussing my husband's plans to handle me was surreal, in ways I'd never experienced. But knowing that we'll be together openly by Christmas makes all the secrecy and careful planning worth it. I've already started looking at apartments in Manhattan like we discussed, and I think the Tribeca penthouse with the terrace would be perfect for entertaining your clients once we're officially together. The signature at the bottom read, "All my love, always and forever, Sophia," accompanied by a small lipstick kiss mark that made the intimacy of their relationship undeniably clear. But it was the postscript that truly revealed the scope of what I was discovering. P.S. I can't stop thinking about our conversation about the house. I know it will be difficult, but once the divorce is finalized and you can sell the Willowbrook Heights property, we'll have enough to purchase that estate. In Greenwich we looked at last month. I already have so many ideas for how we could renovate it together. I read that note 3 times before the full implications settled into my consciousness. This wasn't a casual affair or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a comprehensive plan to dismantle my marriage and replace me with someone who was already making detailed arrangements for the life she intended to build with my husband. Someone named Sophia was so confident in her place in Marcus's future that she was apartment hunting in Manhattan and discussing real estate investments that involved selling our family home. My curatorial training kicked in automatically, the same methodical approach I used to authenticate questionable artworks. I photographed the note with my phone, documenting the evidence before carefully replacing it exactly as I'd found it. Marcus couldn't know that I'd discovered his secret, not until I understood the full scope of what I was dealing with and had time to formulate an appropriate response. But even as my professional instincts took control, the emotional impact was devastating in ways I hadn't prepared for. This wasn't just infidelity. It was systematic betrayal that had been carefully planned over months, possibly longer. Marcus hadn't made a mistake or succumbed to temptation. He'd constructed an entire parallel relationship while methodically preparing to end our marriage in ways that would maximize his financial and social advantages. The Ocean View Resort mentioned in the note was a luxury destination in Newport that catered to wealthy couples seeking romantic getaways. A quick internet search revealed that their suite started at $800 per night, with oceanfront accommodations featuring private balconies and champagne service. The weekend Sophia referenced coincided perfectly with Marcus's supposed attendance at a sustainable architecture conference in Providence, an event he'd described in detail over dinner, complete with complaints about the cramped hotel accommodations and boring evening receptions. While I'd been sympathizing with his professional obligations and supporting his career development, Marcus had actually been enjoying luxury accommodations with his mistress, making promises about our shared future that involved dissolving our marriage and selling our home to fund his new life with someone else. The reference to our favorite restaurant in Mystic suggested that their relationship had progressed beyond occasional meetings to established routines and shared traditions, the kind of intimate patterns that Marcus and I had built over years of marriage. They had inside jokes, special places, and apparently even their song that violinists played during romantic dinners I was unknowingly funding through our joint accounts. But perhaps most devastating was the casual way Sophia discussed handling the situation with Madison, as if I were an obstacle to be managed rather than a person whose life was being systematically dismantled. The confidence in her tone suggested that Marcus had assured her my removal from his life was simply a matter of logistics and timing rather than an emotional challenge or moral consideration. The Manhattan apartment search revealed ambitions that extended far beyond ending our marriage. Sophia wasn't just trying to steal my husband. She was planning to upgrade their entire lifestyle using assets that Marcus and I had built together over 6 years of marriage. The Tribeca penthouse she mentioned would cost millions of dollars, money that would presumably come from liquidating our shared investments and selling our historic home. As I sat on our bedroom floor, surrounded by Marcus's carefully organized wardrobe, I realized that every conversation we'd had about our future, every plan we'd made together, every dream we'd shared had been contaminated by his secret relationship with someone who was already making competing plans for the same resources and time. The man who'd held me while I cried over failed pregnancy attempts was simultaneously promising another woman the family and future I thought we were building together. The Greenwich Estate reference was particularly cruel because Marcus and I had driven past that very property 6 months earlier during one of our weekend antiquing trips. I'd commented on its beautiful gardens and historic architecture, and Marcus had agreed that it would be a dream home for someone with unlimited resources and excellent taste. Now I realized he'd been evaluating it not as a fantasy for us, but as a concrete possibility for his life with Sophia. The professional implications were equally devastating. Sophia's confidence about entertaining Marcus's clients in their future Manhattan penthouse suggested that she expected to become his business partner as well as his romantic partner. The architectural firm that Marcus and I had built together, using contacts from my museum work and social connections from my family's influence, was apparently being repositioned as the foundation for his new life with someone else. But as I carefully returned the note to its hiding place and restored Marcus's closet to perfect order, something unexpected happened alongside the devastation. A cold, analytical fury began building in my chest, the same controlled rage I'd felt when discovering that prestigious galleries were trying to pass off obvious forgeries as authentic masterpieces. The woman who'd built her career on exposing people who thought they could deceive experts was about to turn those same skills on the most important deception of her life. Marcus and Sophia had made a critical error in underestimating who they were dealing with. They'd forgotten that I came from a family whose resources could make their careful planning look amateur, and whose connections could ensure that their betrayal had consequences they'd never imagined possible. The transformation from devastated wife to strategic investigator happened with the same precision I brought to authenticating disputed Renaissance masterpieces. But this time the stakes weren't academic reputation or financial recovery. This time, I was investigating the systematic destruction of my own life by two people who'd underestimated exactly what kind of resources they were dealing with. Within hours of discovering Sophia's letter, I was implementing an investigation strategy that would make federal prosecutors envious. My first call was to Alexander, not for emotional support or family sympathy, but because my brother had access to investigative resources that could uncover information most people didn't even know existed. When I reached him at his Manhattan office that Thursday evening, I didn't waste time with explanations or emotional processing. I simply said, I need a complete background investigation on someone named Sophia, last name unknown, who's having an affair with Marcus. I need to know everything: financial history, professional background, previous relationships, family connections, legal issues, and anything else that might be relevant. Alexander's response was immediate and characteristically thorough. Consider it done. I'll have Elena Vasquez start tonight. She's the former CIA analyst who handles sensitive background investigations for Sinclair Holdings. Elena can access databases and information sources that most private investigators can't even imagine. Give me 48 hours, and I'll have a complete profile that includes information Sophia probably doesn't remember about herself. But I wasn't content to wait passively for professional investigators to uncover the truth. My art authentication background had taught me that the most revealing information often came from sources that subjects didn't realize they were creating: social media profiles, professional networking sites, public records, and digital footprints could tell stories that people never intended to share, especially when analyzed by someone trained to spot patterns and inconsistencies. I spent that entire evening creating a secure digital investigation environment, purchasing a laptop with cash, and establishing email accounts and social media profiles that couldn't be traced back to me. Using techniques I'd learned during art fraud investigations, I began building false identities that would allow me to research Sophia's background without triggering security alerts or leaving digital evidence that could compromise my investigation. The initial social media reconnaissance revealed more than I'd expected to discover through simple internet searches. Sophia Blackwell maintained carefully curated Instagram and Facebook profiles that presented her as a successful interior design consultant specializing in luxury residential projects. Her posts showed an affluent lifestyle filled with expensive restaurants, exclusive social events, and high-end shopping experiences that suggested either independent wealth or a very generous benefactor. But more importantly, her social media activity patterns revealed timeline information that correlated perfectly with Marcus's unexplained absences and mysterious client meetings. Photos from luxury restaurants in Hartford were posted on evenings when Marcus claimed to be working late at the office. Weekend getaway posts from exclusive resorts coincided exactly with his supposed professional conferences and architectural symposiums. The geolocation data embedded in her photos told an even more damning story. Sophia had been at the Ocean View resort in Newport during the exact weekend Marcus supposedly attended the Sustainable Architecture Conference in Providence. Her Instagram stories from that weekend showed champagne toasts, sunset views from what was clearly a luxury suite, and romantic dinner settings that matched perfectly with the intimate details she'd described in her letter. Professional networking sites revealed additional information that explained how their relationship had developed. Sophia's LinkedIn profile showed her working as a design consultant for several high-end architectural firms in Connecticut, including companies that regularly collaborated with Marcus's practice on luxury residential projects. Their professional paths had intersected multiple times over the past 2 years, providing perfect cover for personal meetings disguised as business consultations. But it was the financial investigation that revealed the true scope of their deception. Using resources available through my museum's research accounts, I began tracing credit card transactions, hotel reservations, and restaurant charges that painted a comprehensive picture of their relationship timeline. Marcus had been funding their affair through cash advances and prepaid cards, but he'd been careless about maintaining complete operational security. The Ocean View Resort reservation had been made using Marcus's personal credit card, booked under both their names in a luxury suite that cost $1,200 per night. The romantic restaurant in Mystic, where they'd apparently become regulars, showed repeated charges on Marcus's business expense account, categorized as client entertainment, but scheduled during times when I knew he had no legitimate business meetings. Most revealing were the jewelry store receipts I discovered through financial records analysis. Marcus had purchased expensive gifts that had never appeared in our home, including a Cartier bracelet worth $15,000 and Tiffany earrings that cost $8,000. These weren't impulse purchases or business-related expenses. They were substantial investments in a relationship that required significant financial commitment. The travel pattern analysis revealed systematic deception that extended back almost 18 months, far longer than I'd initially suspected. Every business trip Marcus had taken, every professional conference he'd attended, every weekend workshop he'd claimed to participate in had been verified against Sophia's travel patterns and social media activity. The correlation was perfect and devastating. She'd accompanied him to luxury destinations, while I'd believed he was advancing his career through professional development. Alexander's investigator, Elena Vasquez, provided background information that transformed my understanding of what I was dealing with entirely. Sophia Blackwell wasn't just another woman having an affair with a married man. She was a sophisticated operator who'd made targeting wealthy married men her specialty for almost a decade. Elena's investigation revealed that Sophia had been married twice previously, both times to successful professionals who'd divorced their first wives to marry her, only to discover that their new bride was already planning her exit strategy with someone even wealthier. Her first marriage to a successful pediatric surgeon in Boston had ended when she'd been caught having an affair with a pharmaceutical executive whose net worth exceeded her husband's by several $1,000,000. The second marriage to that pharmaceutical executive had lasted less than 3 years before ending in a bitter divorce when he discovered she'd been systematically transferring assets to offshore accounts while planning her departure with a tech entrepreneur from Silicon Valley. The pattern was unmistakable and horrifying. Sophia specialized in identifying successful married men whose wives had independent wealth or family connections that could be leveraged for maximum financial gain. She would infiltrate their professional networks, establish romantic relationships under the guise of business collaboration, and then systematically prepare to replace their wives while gaining access to shared assets and family resources. But Elena's investigation revealed something even more disturbing. Sophia had been researching the Sinclair family for over 2 years, long before she'd begun her relationship with Marcus. She'd identified me as a target not because of Marcus's success, but because of my family's generational wealth and social connections. Her affair with my husband was actually a calculated strategy to gain access to Sinclair family resources that extended far beyond our personal marriage. The Manhattan apartment hunting that Sophia had referenced in her letter wasn't just ambitious fantasy. It was based on detailed financial analysis of our shared assets combined with research into Alexander's wealth and the broader Sinclair family holdings. She'd apparently convinced Marcus that divorcing me would provide access to settlement money that could fund their luxury lifestyle. But she'd also been researching ways to maintain connections to Sinclair family resources even after destroying our marriage. This revelation transformed my investigation from personal betrayal recovery to family protection strategy. Sophia wasn't just trying to steal my husband. She was attempting to infiltrate and exploit my family's wealth through systematic deception that made her previous operations look amateur by comparison. But as I compiled evidence that revealed the true scope of their deception, I realized that Sophia and Marcus had made a critical error in their target selection. They'd assumed that I would be a passive victim, too emotionally devastated to mount effective resistance to their carefully planned operation. They'd underestimated someone whose professional expertise involved exposing sophisticated deceptions, and they'd completely failed to research the kind of resources that Alexander could deploy when someone threatened his family. The investigation, that had begun as personal betrayal recovery, was about to become something much more comprehensive and devastating. Sophia Blackwell had built her career on exploiting people who trusted her, but she was about to discover what happened when she targeted a family whose resources could ensure that her pattern of victimization ended permanently. The plan that emerged from my weeks of investigation was more sophisticated than any art authentication case I'd ever handled, requiring precise coordination of multiple elements that would ensure Sophia and Marcus faced consequences proportional to their elaborate deception. But unlike my professional cases, this operation had a personal dimension that demanded not just exposure, but complete social and professional destruction, delivered in the most public way possible. Alexander's resources proved invaluable in orchestrating what would become the most talked-about social catastrophe in Willowbrook Heights history. Through his network of contacts in Connecticut's elite social circles, Alexander learned that the Hartford Museum of Fine Arts was planning their annual Winter Gala for early December, an event that traditionally attracted the most influential philanthropists, business leaders, and cultural figures from across New England. More importantly, the museum's board had been struggling to secure an appropriate venue that could accommodate their expanding guest list while maintaining the exclusivity that made the gala a premier social event. Alexander's solution was elegant and devastating in its simplicity. He offered to host the Winter Gala at the Sinclair family estate in Martha's Vineyard, with Sinclair Holdings providing transportation via private jets and luxury accommodations for out-of-town guests. The museum board accepted immediately, thrilled to have access to one of New England's most prestigious private estates for their most important annual fundraising event. The guest list would include everyone who mattered in Connecticut's professional and social hierarchy, exactly the audience needed to ensure that Sophia and Marcus's exposure had maximum impact. But hosting the gala was only the first element of my strategy. The second component required manipulating Sophia's professional ambitions in ways that would ensure her attendance while simultaneously setting up her humiliation. Through carefully orchestrated social media intelligence, I'd learned that Sophia had been desperately trying to establish herself as the interior designer of choice for Connecticut's wealthiest families, using her relationship with Marcus to gain access to social circles that would normally be beyond her reach. I created a fictional opportunity that would prove irresistible to someone with Sophia's ambitions and Marcus's ego. Using one of the false identities I'd established during my investigation, I reached out to Sophia's design consultancy with a proposal for a major residential renovation project. The client, supposedly a recently divorced pharmaceutical heiress who'd relocated to Connecticut from Switzerland, was seeking an interior designer to completely renovate a newly purchased estate in Greenwich. The project details were carefully crafted to appeal to Sophia's specific psychological vulnerabilities. The budget was substantial enough to represent a career-defining opportunity: $2 million for comprehensive interior renovation of a 12,000-square-foot colonial mansion. The timeline was aggressive, requiring immediate attention and complete dedication through the winter months. Most importantly, the client specifically requested that the designer attend the Hartford Museum Winter Gala as her personal guest, claiming that she wanted to observe how her designer interacted with Connecticut's cultural elite before finalizing the contract. Sophia's response exceeded my expectations. She cleared her entire schedule to accommodate this opportunity, canceled existing client commitments, and began developing design concepts that demonstrated complete investment in securing the contract. More importantly, she convinced Marcus to accompany her to the Winter Gala, telling him that this project would establish her as the premier luxury interior designer in Connecticut, while providing networking opportunities for his architectural practice. The third element of my plan required ensuring that the truth about their relationship would emerge in the most devastating way possible, with sufficient evidence to prevent any attempt at damage control or alternative explanations. Elena Vasquez's continued surveillance had provided real-time intelligence about their activities, including their weekend getaway to the Mandarin Oriental in Boston the previous month, complete with photographic evidence that left no room for misinterpretation. But photographs alone wouldn't create the dramatic impact I was seeking. I needed Sophia and Marcus to incriminate themselves publicly, in front of witnesses whose social and professional standing would make denial impossible. The solution came through understanding their psychological profiles and exploiting their confidence in their own deception. Alexander arranged for a private investigator named Detective Richard Hayes, a former FBI agent who specialized in matrimonial fraud cases, to attend the Winter Gala as a representative of an international art recovery firm. Detective Hayes would pose as someone investigating insurance fraud related to stolen artwork, providing perfect cover for his presence while ensuring that any confrontation would be witnessed by someone with impeccable professional credentials. The fourth component involved orchestrating the perfect revelation moment that would ensure maximum emotional and social impact. Through Elena's surveillance intelligence, I knew that Sophia and Marcus had been planning to use the Winter Gala as their coming-out event, the first public appearance where they would begin transitioning from secret affair to legitimate couple. They'd been strategizing about how to present their relationship to Connecticut's social elite in ways that would minimize scandal while maximizing acceptance. I arranged for their plans to be systematically destroyed through a series of carefully timed revelations that would build to an inescapable conclusion. The evening would begin with casual social interaction that allowed them to believe their deception was successful, followed by increasingly pointed questions about their relationship that would force them into defensive positions, and culminating in the presentation of evidence that would make continued denial impossible. The fifth element required ensuring that the consequences extended beyond personal humiliation into professional destruction that would prevent them from simply relocating and starting over in a different social circle. Elena's investigation had revealed that both Sophia and Marcus had been engaging in professional misconduct that violated ethical standards in their respective industries. Sophia's design consultancy had been systematically overbilling clients for materials and services, using the extra income to fund her luxury lifestyle and her relationship with Marcus. She'd also been violating client confidentiality by photographing expensive homes and their contents for personal social media use, behavior that violated professional standards and potentially compromised her client's security. Marcus's architectural firm had been cutting corners on building inspections and safety certifications to accommodate accelerated project timelines, behavior that could result in significant liability issues if construction problems emerged. He'd also been using client relationship information to benefit Sophia's design business, steering renovation projects to her consultancy in exchange for kickbacks that weren't disclosed to his clients. Alexander arranged for representatives from the Connecticut Professional Licensing Board and the Better Business Bureau to attend the Winter Gala, ensuring that any professional misconduct revelations would be witnessed by authorities with the power to initiate formal investigations and disciplinary proceedings. The sixth component involved protecting my own interests and ensuring that any financial assets they'd planned to steal remained secure. Alexander's legal team had prepared documentation that would freeze joint accounts, prevent asset transfers, and ensure that any attempts to liquidate shared investments would be blocked immediately following the public exposure. But perhaps most importantly, the plan included provisions for protecting other potential victims from Sophia's pattern of predatory behavior. Elena's investigation had identified at least 3 other wealthy married men in Connecticut who appeared to be in various stages of Sophia's manipulation process. The public exposure at the Winter Gala would serve as a warning that could prevent other families from experiencing the systematic betrayal that had nearly destroyed my marriage. The timeline for the operation was carefully coordinated to ensure maximum impact while preventing any opportunities for damage control. The Winter Gala was scheduled for the second Saturday in December, giving me 6 weeks to finalize all preparations while maintaining the appearance of ignorance about Marcus's affair. During this period, I continued playing the role of the oblivious wife, supporting Marcus's career ambitions, and appearing genuinely excited about social events that would showcase our apparently successful marriage. But privately, I was coordinating with Alexander, Elena, Detective Hayes, and the museum's event planning committee to ensure that every detail of the evening would contribute to the complete destruction of two people who'd underestimated exactly what kind of family they'd chosen to betray. The woman who'd specialized in exposing art forgeries was about to orchestrate the exposure of the most elaborate personal deception of her career, with consequences that would ensure Sophia Blackwell never again victimized another family. The trap was set, the evidence was overwhelming, and the audience was confirmed. In less than 2 weeks, the most exclusive social event in Connecticut would become the stage for justice delivered with surgical precision to two people who'd forgotten that some games have consequences that extend far beyond anything the players could imagine. The night of the Hartford Museum Winter Gala arrived with the crisp perfection of early December in New England, and the Sinclair family estate had been transformed into something that would have impressed European royalty. Alexander had spared no expense in creating an atmosphere of sophisticated elegance that would serve as the perfect backdrop for the social catastrophe I was about to orchestrate. The main ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and fresh, floral arrangements worth more than most people's cars, while uniformed servers moved seamlessly between guests carrying champagne that cost $300 per bottle. Stood near the entrance of the ballroom wearing a midnight blue silk gown that Alexander had commissioned from a Parisian designer specifically for this evening, every detail chosen to project confidence and authority rather than vulnerability. My grandmother's diamond necklace, worth more than Sophia's annual income, caught the light as I moved through the crowd, greeting Connecticut's most influential citizens who had no idea they were about to witness the most spectacular exposure of betrayal in the state's social history. Marcus arrived precisely on schedule, looking distinguished in his custom-tailored tuxedo, his arm linked with Sophia in a gesture that would have appeared innocent to anyone who didn't know what I knew. Sophia had clearly invested significant resources in her appearance for this evening, wearing what I immediately recognized as a custom Valentino gown in emerald green that probably cost $15,000. Her hair was styled in an elegant updo that showcased diamond earrings that looked suspiciously like the Tiffany pieces Marcus had purchased with our joint credit card, and her confidence was palpable as she surveyed the room filled with Connecticut's elite. The first phase of my plan unfolded exactly as choreographed. I approached them with the warm smile of a devoted wife who was genuinely pleased to see her husband's professional colleague at such a prestigious event. "Sophia, how wonderful that you could join us tonight," I said, embracing her with the kind of affection that made nearby guests assume we were close friends. "Marcus mentioned you were working on that exciting new project in Greenwich. You must tell me all about it." Sophia's response was perfectly calculated, delivered with the confidence of someone who believed her deception was undetectable. She described the fictional renovation project with elaborate detail, clearly having invested significant time in developing backstory and design concepts that would impress Connecticut's cultural elite. Her enthusiasm was genuine as she discussed budget allocations and timeline requirements, completely unaware that every word was being recorded by discreet audio equipment that Elena had positioned throughout the ballroom. Marcus contributed to the conversation with obvious pride in his companion's professional achievements, discussing how their collaboration on various projects had strengthened both their businesses. His comfort level with publicly acknowledging their relationship was exactly what I'd hoped to achieve. Complete confidence that their careful planning had succeeded in establishing social acceptance for their transition from secret affair to legitimate partnership. For the first hour of the evening, I played the role of the gracious hostess, introducing Sophia and Marcus to museum board members, prominent philanthropists, and business leaders who represented the kind of social connections they'd been seeking to establish. Every interaction was carefully orchestrated to ensure maximum witness credibility when the truth emerged, while simultaneously building their confidence that their deception had been successfully integrated into Connecticut's social hierarchy. Second phase began when Detective Hayes approached our group, introducing himself as an international art recovery specialist who was investigating insurance fraud related to stolen Renaissance paintings. His presence created the perfect opportunity for me to demonstrate my professional expertise while simultaneously establishing the investigative framework that would soon be applied to more personal deceptions. Madison's authentication work has been invaluable in several high-profile recovery cases, Detective Hayes explained to the group, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to testifying in federal court. Her ability to spot inconsistencies that others miss has helped us recover millions in stolen artwork and expose forgery schemes that seemed undetectable. I used this opening to discuss my methodology for identifying deception, explaining how forgers often created elaborate backstories and supporting documentation to validate their work, but inevitably left traces that trained investigators could recognize. The conversation was ostensibly about art fraud, but everyone in our group understood that the principles applied to any form of systematic deception. Sophia's discomfort was becoming increasingly apparent as the conversation continued, though she attempted to maintain her composed facade. Marcus, however, seemed genuinely interested in the discussion, asking detailed questions about investigative techniques that he apparently assumed would never be applied to his personal life. The third phase required perfect timing and coordination, with Alexander, who had been monitoring the evening's progression through discreet communication with Elena's surveillance team. At exactly 10:30, as the evening's formal program concluded and guests began transitioning to more casual social circulation, Alexander approached our group with information that would begin the systematic destruction of everything Sophia and Marcus thought they'd achieved. "Madison, I think there's something you need to know about your new friend," Alexander said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that immediately commanded attention from everyone within hearing distance. The conversation around us gradually quieted as prominent guests sensed that something significant was about to unfold. "It seems that Sophia hasn't been entirely honest about her background or her current activities," Alexander continued, producing a leather portfolio that contained Elena's comprehensive investigation findings. "The Greenwich renovation project she's been discussing so enthusiastically doesn't actually exist. The client she's been meeting with is a fictional identity created by someone investigating insurance fraud in the interior design industry." The color drained from Sophia's face as she realized that her carefully constructed deception was about to be exposed in front of Connecticut's most influential citizens. Marcus immediately stepped forward, attempting to control the narrative before it could develop further, but Alexander's next revelation eliminated any possibility of damage control. "More importantly," Alexander said, opening the portfolio to reveal high-resolution photographs from Elena's surveillance operation, "it appears that Marcus and Sophia have been conducting an affair for over 18 months, using elaborate lies about business meetings and professional conferences to conceal their relationship from their respective spouses." The photographs were undeniably damning, images of Marcus and Sophia entering luxury hotels together, embracing passionately in restaurant parking lots, and sharing intimate moments on private resort balconies that coincided exactly with Marcus's supposed business trips. The evidence was so comprehensive and professionally documented that denial was impossible. Detective Hayes stepped forward at this moment, his federal credentials adding official weight to the revelations. "These images were obtained during a legitimate investigation into marriage fraud and financial deception," he announced, ensuring that everyone understood the legal implications of what they were witnessing. "The subjects have been under surveillance for several weeks as part of a broader investigation into systematic fraud affecting multiple families." The reaction from the surrounding guests was immediate and devastating. Museum board members who had been discussing potential business partnerships with Marcus began distancing themselves physically and socially. Prominent philanthropists who had been considering Sophia for interior design projects started conversations with other guests about the reliability of professional references and background checks. But the most satisfying moment came when I produced Sophia's handwritten letter from my evening bag, the same note I'd discovered in Marcus's suit pocket months earlier. "I think everyone should understand the full scope of what we're dealing with," I said, beginning to read aloud the intimate details of their relationship and their plans to liquidate our shared assets to fund their new life together. The public. Reading of Sophia's letter created a hush throughout the ballroom that was broken only by the sound of cell phones, as guests began documenting what would undoubtedly become the most talked-about social scandal in Connecticut history. The woman who had been so confident in her ability to manipulate wealthy men was watching her reputation and career prospects disintegrate in real time, witnessed by everyone who mattered in her chosen professional and social circles. Marcus's final attempt at explanation was pathetic and desperate, claiming that their relationship had been misunderstood and that the evidence was being presented without proper context. But with photographs, financial records, hotel receipts, and Sophia's own written confessions as evidence, his protests only served to highlight the elaborate nature of their deception. The evening concluded with both Sophia and Marcus being escorted from the estate by security personnel, while representatives from professional licensing boards began discussing the formal investigations that would follow. The woman who had made a career of destroying marriages and exploiting wealthy families was about to discover that some consequences extend far beyond social embarrassment into permanent professional and legal accountability. 8 months have passed since that December evening when Connecticut's social elite witnessed the most spectacular destruction of 2 careers and reputations in the state's recent history, and I'm sitting in my new penthouse apartment overlooking Boston Harbor, watching the sunrise paint the water in shades of gold and rose. The view from this 32nd floor sanctuary is breathtaking, a daily reminder that my life has transformed in ways I never could have imagined when I was trapped in a marriage built on systematic deception and elaborate lies. The immediate aftermath of the winter gala was swift and devastating for both Sophia and Marcus, like watching a controlled demolition that destroyed multiple structures simultaneously. Within 24 hours of their public exposure, video footage and photographs from the evening had spread throughout New England's professional and social networks, creating a cautionary tale that would be discussed in Connecticut's elite circles for years to come. Sophia's career imploded with the kind of thoroughness that made federal fraud prosecutions look gentle by comparison. The Connecticut Professional Licensing Board launched an immediate investigation into her business practices, uncovering the systematic overbilling scheme that had funded her luxury lifestyle and her affair with my husband. Her clients, many of whom were prominent figures who'd attended the winter gala, began demanding audits of their projects and discovering that they'd been charged for materials and services that were never provided. The fictional Greenwich renovation project that had served as bait for the trap became the foundation for insurance fraud charges when investigators discovered that Sophia had been creating false documentation and inflated invoices for work that never existed. Her attempts to establish credibility in Connecticut's luxury design market had involved fabricating client references, misrepresenting project budgets, and violating professional ethics standards in ways that made her unemployable in the interior design industry. But the professional destruction was only the beginning of Sophia's consequences. Elena's investigation had provided evidence to federal authorities about her pattern of targeting wealthy married men across multiple states, behavior that constituted organized fraud affecting dozens of families over nearly a decade. The systematic nature of her operations, combined with the financial losses suffered by her victims, resulted in federal charges that carried potential prison sentences measured in years rather than months. Marcus's professional destruction followed a similar trajectory, but with the added complication of architectural licensing violations that affected public safety. The Connecticut Building Commission's investigation revealed that his firm had been cutting corners on safety inspections and building certifications to accommodate accelerated project timelines, creating potential liability issues that could affect the structural integrity of buildings throughout the state. His clients, many of whom were prominent business leaders who'd witnessed his public humiliation at the Winter Gala, began demanding comprehensive reviews of their projects and discovering construction shortcuts that violated building codes and safety regulations. The lawsuits began within weeks, with homeowners seeking damages for substandard construction work and municipalities investigating whether buildings designed by Marcus's firm met legal safety requirements. The Connecticut Board of Architects suspended his professional license pending a complete investigation into his business practices, effectively ending his ability to practice architecture in the state. His firm's associates abandoned the practice immediately, taking their clients and projects to competitors who hadn't been publicly exposed for systematic professional misconduct. But perhaps most satisfying was watching the collapse of their planned future together. The Manhattan penthouse that Sophia had been researching became impossible to afford when both their incomes disappeared and legal expenses began consuming their remaining assets. The Greenwich estate they'd discussed purchasing was acquired by another family, while Marcus and Sophia were dealing with bankruptcy attorneys and federal prosecutors. Their relationship, which had seemed so solid when built on shared deception and mutual exploitation, disintegrated under the pressure of public scrutiny and financial stress. Within 3 months of the Winter Gala, they were blaming each other for the catastrophic exposure, with each claiming they'd been manipulated by the other into participating in schemes they hadn't fully understood. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly straightforward, largely because Marcus's destroyed earning potential left him unable to fight for anything substantial. Connecticut's equitable distribution laws worked in my favor, particularly when combined with evidence that Marcus had been systematically depleting our joint assets to fund his affair. I retained the Willowbrook Heights mansion, our investment, portfolios, and most of our shared wealth, while Marcus was left with legal debts and professional obligations he couldn't fulfill. I sold the mansion immediately, unable to live surrounded by memories of a marriage that had been partially fabricated. From the beginning, the sale provided the capital to purchase this Boston penthouse and establish complete financial independence that ensures I'll never again be vulnerable to someone else's deception. The location in Boston's financial district reflects my new career direction. I've established a consulting firm specializing in matrimonial fraud investigation, helping other women uncover the kind of systematic deception that I'd lived with unknowingly for 18 months. My expertise in authentication and pattern recognition, combined with Alexander's investigative resources, has made me uniquely qualified to help clients discover truths they suspect but can't prove. The notoriety from the Winter Gala revelation, rather than damaging my professional reputation, actually enhanced it in unexpected ways. Women facing similar situations began seeking my services specifically, knowing that I understood both the technical aspects of financial investigation and the emotional complexities of discovering that the person you trust most has been systematically betraying you. Alexander and I have grown closer through this experience in ways that have strengthened our family bonds while creating new business opportunities. Sinclair Holdings has established a new division focused on background investigations for high-net-worth individuals, with me serving as senior partner specializing in matrimonial and relationship fraud. We now handle cases involving hidden assets, secret relationships, and financial deception throughout New England and beyond. More importantly, the investigation and exposure of Sophia's pattern of predatory behavior has protected other families from experiencing the kind of systematic betrayal that nearly destroyed my marriage. 3 other women in Connecticut contacted me after the Winter Gala, reporting that they'd discovered their husbands had been in various stages of relationships with Sophia before her public exposure ended those manipulations. The legal proceedings continue, with both Sophia and Marcus facing consequences that will affect their lives for years to come. Sophia's federal fraud trial is scheduled for next month, with prosecutors seeking a sentence that will ensure she never again has the opportunity to victimize other families. Marcus has relocated to Florida, where he's attempting to rebuild his career in construction management rather than architectural design. But the professional misconduct findings follow him wherever he applies for work. The personal growth I've experienced through this ordeal has been transformative in ways I hadn't anticipated. The woman who once trusted completely because she couldn't imagine systematic personal deception has developed the kind of analytical skepticism that protects against future manipulation while still allowing for genuine human connection. I've learned that the skills I use to authenticate Renaissance masterpieces can be applied to authenticating human relationships, ensuring that future partnerships are built on verified truth rather than assumed honesty. My new life in Boston has provided opportunities for relationships based on complete transparency and mutual respect. The professional network I've developed through my consulting work includes other women who've overcome significant personal challenges, creating friendships built on shared strength rather than shared vulnerabilities. I've begun dating again, carefully and selectively, using the same methodical approach to relationship verification that I apply to my professional cases. The view from this penthouse reminds me daily that perspective changes everything. From the valley of my marriage to Marcus, I couldn't see the scope of the deception surrounding me. But from this elevated position, with clarity and distance, I can see threats and opportunities for miles in every direction. I never intend to be trapped in someone else's elaborate lies again. Tomorrow morning, I'm meeting with a new client whose husband has been exhibiting behavioral patterns that suggest systematic deception involving both financial fraud and extramarital relationships. It's exactly the kind of complex investigation that makes my pulse quicken with professional excitement. And I intend to uncover the truth with the same methodical thoroughness that exposed Marcus and Sophia's affair. The woman who specialized in detecting forged brushstrokes in classical paintings has learned to detect forged emotions in personal relationships with equal precision, and the results have been devastatingly effective for anyone foolish enough to underestimate her capabilities. Justice, I've discovered, tastes even better when it's served with perfect timing, comprehensive evidence, and witnessed by exactly the right people to ensure that consequences extend far beyond personal embarrassment into permanent accountability. Some games really are more dangerous than the players realize, especially when they involve families whose resources can ensure that patterns of victimization end permanently and completely. Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked, just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.